Hey guys, tonight we're going to dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and ease into a truly peculiar corner of ancient history. We're traveling back to the bustling, vibrant world of ancient Rome, specifically to the heart of their social universe, the dinner party. But this isn't just any dinner party. Imagine a meal so opulent, so drawn out, so utterly dedicated to leisurely enjoyment that it wasn't uncommon for guests to simply fall asleep. Yes, you heard that right. We're talking about when ancient Romans hosted dinner parties for sleep. You'll discover a culture so devoted to relaxation and excess that a post-meal nap right there at the host's house was not just tolerated, but practically part of the evening's itinerary. You probably won't survive this journey without feeling a little bit sleepy yourself. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're up for it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is for you right now. It's always cool to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You might think of dinner parties as a modern invention, a way to catch up with friends, share some good food, and maybe play a board game or two. But in ancient Rome, the cena, their main evening meal, was far more than just sustenance. It was the very bedrock of their social, political, and cultural life. Imagine your calendar filled not with urgent meetings, but with invitations to elaborate dinners that could last for hours, sometimes extending well into the night. This wasn't just about eating. It was about performance, about displaying wealth, about forging alliances, and about reinforcing one's place in the intricate Roman social hierarchy. You see, if you wanted to get ahead in Roman society, you needed to be seen, and you needed to be seen at the right dinner tables. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman dinner party evolved from humble beginnings into an elaborate ritual. Early Romans, especially during the Republic, were known for their austerity. Their meals were simple, their homes unadorned, and their focus was on civic duty and military prowess. Think of a stern, upright Roman citizen eating plain porridge and vegetables, perhaps with a bit of cheese. That image is far removed from the lavish banquets of the later empire, isn't it? But as Rome's power and wealth grew, so did its appetite for luxury, and the dinner party became the primary canvas for displaying that burgeoning affluence. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman hosts would intentionally make their dinner parties so long and so rich in courses that guests would physically struggle to stay awake. It was a subtle flex of power, a way to demonstrate that their hospitality was so abundant, their food so plentiful, and their wine so free-flowing that resistance was futile. Imagine your host encouraging you to try just one more course, knowing full well you're already nodding off as if to say, "My bounty is so great it literally puts you to sleep." Historians still argue whether this prolonged duration was primarily a consequence of the vastness of the meal, or if it was a deliberate strategy by hosts to emphasize their generosity and the immersive nature of their hospitality. It's hard to say for sure, but either way, the outcome was often the same drowsy guess. This shift from simplicity to extravagance was a gradual process influenced by Rome's growing empire and its contact with other cultures, particularly the Greeks, who had a long tradition of elaborate intellectual symposia. But we'll delve deeper into those influences later. For now, just picture the scene: the soft glow of oil lamps, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of cups, and the rich aromas of a dozen different dishes. This was the stage where Roman social life played out, a stage that by the end of the night often doubled as a luxurious, albeit impromptu, sleeping arrangement. You've just been introduced to the Roman dinner party as the epicenter of their social world, evolving from humble beginnings to extravagant affairs. Now let's step inside the very heart of that experience, the room specifically designed for this leisurely ritual, the triclinium layout. Imagine pushing aside a heavy curtain, entering a space bathed in soft light, and seeing not dining chairs, but luxurious couches arranged in a very particular way. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman triclinium was the most common form of dining room, named for its distinctive arrangement of three tri-reclining couches. Klonoridowas. In Greek, you can almost feel yourself entering, ready to recline. These couches were typically arranged in a U shape around a central low table. Each couch could comfortably accommodate three diners, meaning a standard triclinium would host 9 people. This number, often considered ideal for Roman social gatherings, allowed for lively conversation without becoming too unwieldy. Think of it as the ultimate in cozy yet formal dining. This setup was a stark contrast to the more upright seating arrangements common in other cultures, or even in earlier Roman periods. The act of reclining rather than sitting signaled a dedication to leisure and indulgence. It was a posture of relaxation, emphasizing that dining was not a hurried affair, but a drawn-out pleasure. You'd remove your sandals upon entering, wash your hands, and then, with practiced ease, recline on your left side, supported by cushions, leaving your right arm free for eating. This posture wasn't just for comfort. It allowed for easy conversation with your neighbors on the adjacent couches, fostering intimacy and conviviality. Here's a quirky tidbit. The positioning of the couches within the triclinium often had specific social implications. The central couch, known as the lectus medius, was typically considered the most prestigious, with the guest of honor often positioned on its left end, allowing them easy interaction with the host, who usually reclined on the lectus emis, the couch closest to the door. Imagine the subtle jockeying for position, the silent signals of status being communicated by who reclined where. Historians still argue whether the precise etiquette of triclinium seating was universally applied across all Roman homes, or if there was more fluidity based on individual household customs and social circles. But it's clear that every position held a meaning. You might even see a particularly ambitious guest subtly try to maneuver themselves closer to the most important person in the room. The space itself was often richly decorated. Walls adorned with frescoes depicting mythological scenes, or still lifes of food floors laid with intricate mosaics, and ceilings painted with elaborate designs. The triclinium wasn't just a functional room. It was an immersive environment designed to delight the senses and contribute to the overall experience of the feast. It emphasized wealth and taste, transforming a simple meal into a luxurious event. The soft lamplight, the murmur of conversation, the tantalizing aromas, and the comfort of the couches all combined to create an atmosphere ripe for prolonged enjoyment. An environment where slipping into a contented slumber after a heavy meal would feel entirely natural. You've explored the unique layout of the Roman triclinium, a room designed for leisurely reclining. Now let's rewind the clock even further past the era of lavish banquets to understand the foundational roots of Roman dining. Early Roman simplicity. Imagine a time when meals were not about grand display, but about sustenance duty and the austere virtues that Romans initially prided themselves on. A mainstream historical fact is that in the early Roman Republic, roughly 509 BC to 27 BC meals were far more modest and utilitarian than the extravagant feasts of the later empire. This era celebrated frugality, discipline, and practical living. You can almost picture a stern Roman paterfamilias, the head of the household, sitting upright at a simple wooden table, with his family perhaps on stools, not sprawling on luxurious couches. The focus was on hard work, military strength, and civic responsibility, not on culinary excess. Their diet largely consisted of staples like grains, vegetables, and legumes. Poles. A thick porridge made from spelt was a common dish, often flavored with vegetables or small amounts of meat if available. Think of it as the original Roman comfort food, hearty and filling, designed to fuel a day of labor or military training. Meat was a luxury typically reserved for special occasions or religious sacrifices. This era emphasized sufficiency over indulgence, reflecting the core values of a nascent republic striving for stability and expansion. Here's a quirky tidbit. During these early times, it was considered highly improper for men to linger over meals or engage in excessive drinking. Meals were efficient affairs consumed with a sense of purpose. Imagine a young Roman soldier, eager to prove his virtue, quickly finishing his meal and excusing himself to attend to duties rather than lounging for hours. This strict adherence to temperance was seen as a mark of good character and moral fortitude. Historians still argue whether this perceived early simplicity was entirely accurate, or if later Roman writers romanticized the past to highlight the supposed decadence of their own era. But the ideal of moderation was certainly a powerful one. You might even picture a grizzled old senator lecturing a younger generation about the lost virtues of simple eating, shaking his head at their newfound love of exotic sauces. The transformation from this austere simplicity to later extravagance wasn't sudden. It was a gradual cultural shift brought about by Rome's increasing wealth, its conquests, and crucially its exposure to other more refined cultures. The contact with the sophisticated civilizations of the Hellenistic East, particularly Greece, would profoundly alter Roman dining customs. But for now, hold on to that image of the simple Roman meal, a stark contrast to the multi-course feasts you'll soon explore, and a reminder that even the most decadent traditions have roots in more humble beginnings. You've just seen the stark contrast of early Roman simplicity in dining. Now let's explore the catalyst for change, the vibrant culture that profoundly reshaped Roman tables and social customs. Greek influence on feasting. Imagine the disciplined, pragmatic Romans encountering the sophisticated, leisurely Greeks, and how that cultural exchange sparked a revolution in their approach to food and entertainment. A mainstream historical fact is that Rome's expansion into the Hellenistic world, particularly its conquest of Greece in the 2nd century BC, brought a massive influx of Greek culture, art, philosophy, and crucially culinary practices. Suddenly, the austere Romans were exposed to a world where dining was an art form, a sensory experience designed for pleasure and intellectual discourse. You can almost feel the Roman appetite for new experiences growing as they encountered Greek banquets so different from their own humble meals. This was not just about adopting new recipes, it was a fundamental shift in attitude towards leisure and indulgence. The Greeks had a long tradition of the symposium, a gathering primarily for drinking wine, accompanied by philosophical discussion, poetry, music, and games. This was a refined affair often held in a dedicated room where reclining was the norm. The Romans, initially a bit wary of such perceived decadence, quickly began to emulate these practices. They absorbed the Greek emphasis on conviviality, the importance of good conversation, and the idea that a meal should be an extended event, not just a quick refueling stop. Here's a quirky tidbit. One of the immediate changes influenced by Greek practices was the adoption of the triclinium itself. While early Romans might have had simple dining tables, the idea of reclining on couches during a meal was distinctly Greek. Imagine a Roman senator used to sitting upright trying to gracefully recline on a couch for the first time, perhaps a bit awkwardly, but quickly appreciating the comfort and the relaxed atmosphere it fostered. Historians still argue whether the Romans fully grasped the philosophical depth of the Greek symposium, or if they primarily adopted its more outward luxurious trappings. But regardless of intent, the physical act of reclining fundamentally altered their dining experience. You might even picture a Roman host proudly showing off his newly acquired Greek-style couches, eager to impress his guests with his newfound sophistication. This cultural exchange wasn't a one-way street, but the Roman absorption of Greek dining customs was particularly significant. They took the Greek template and in many ways amplified it, adding their own penchant for grandeur and excess. From the types of dishes served to the forms of entertainment, the very rhythm of the Roman feast began to beat to a more Hellenistic drum. This profound influence laid the groundwork for the elaborate multi-hour dinner parties that would become characteristic of the Roman Empire, setting the stage for meals so lengthy and luxurious that sleep became an almost inevitable and acceptable outcome. You've seen how Greek culture profoundly influenced Roman dining, shifting it from simple fare to elaborate affairs. Now let's focus on the centerpiece of this new culinary landscape, the moxina, the main meal. Imagine the sun beginning to set the day's work winding down and the promise of a long, leisurely evening meal stretching before you, the most important social event of the Roman day. A mainstream historical fact is that the cena was the principal meal of the day for Romans, typically eaten in the late afternoon or early evening. This wasn't a quick bite. It was a substantial multi-course affair designed for prolonged enjoyment and social interaction. You can almost feel the anticipation building as the household prepared for the evening's feast, the kitchen coming alive with activity slaves scurrying about. For the Romans, the cena was the true opportunity for social engagement, where business was discussed, alliances were forged, and reputations were made or broken. The duration of the cena varied depending on the host's wealth and social ambition. For common folk, it might still be a relatively simple meal, perhaps just a few dishes. But for the elite, it could easily last for 4 or 5 or even 6 hours, sometimes extending well past midnight. This wasn't a bug, it was a feature. The extended duration emphasized leisure and luxury, a clear signal that the host had both the resources and the time to dedicate to such prolonged indulgence. A Roman could easily spend more time dining than engaging in their actual profession. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Roman writer and satirist Petronius, in his Satyricon, famously described a ridiculously extravagant feast called the Dinner of Trimalchio, which, while fictional and greatly exaggerated, paints a vivid picture of the sheer excess some Romans aspired to. It features bizarre dishes, elaborate theatrical entertainment, and a host so obsessed with display that he serves courses designed more for shock value than actual consumption. Imagine course after course arriving each more outlandish than the last until you're not just full, but almost overwhelmed by the spectacle. Historians still argue whether such extreme decadence, as depicted by Petronius, was purely a literary caricature or if it reflected a genuine, albeit rare, reality among the Roman elite. It's likely a bit of both, but it certainly shows the direction some Roman feasts were heading. The cena itself was structured in a specific way, typically divided into three main parts: the gustatio appetizers, the primi mensae main courses, and the secundae mensae desserts. Each part had its own character, its own culinary offerings, and its own pace. This structured progression allowed for a slow, deliberate unwinding of the day, an unhurried immersion into the pleasures of food, wine, and conversation. It was a feast designed not just to fill the stomach, but to satisfy the soul, or at least to impress one's peers. And as you'll see, the sheer volume and duration of this main meal often led to a very comfortable, albeit temporary, surrender to slumber. You've just learned about the cena, the main Roman meal, and its structured progression. Now let's begin that feast at the very beginning with the delightful and often surprising first course, the gustatio appetizers. Imagine yourself reclining on that comfortable couch, eyes scanning the array of small, enticing dishes, a tantalizing prelude to the culinary journey ahead. A mainstream historical fact is that the gustatio, also known as promulsus, from mulsum, a honeyed wine often served with it, was the initial part of a Roman dinner party. These were not just simple nibbles. They were carefully prepared dishes designed to awaken the palate and often to impress the guests with a display of creativity and access to diverse ingredients. You can almost feel your taste buds tingling, anticipating the flavors. This course was meant to stimulate the appetite, not sate it, a delicate balancing act for the Roman chef. The dishes served during the gustatio were typically light and varied. Common offerings included eggs often boiled or prepared with sauces, various types of olives, fresh vegetables like lettuce and radishes, and sometimes small pieces of fish or seafood. These were often seasoned with garum, a fermented fish sauce that was a staple of Roman cooking, or with herbs and spices. Think of it as a parade of small plates, each offering a distinct flavor and texture. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Roman hosts took the extravagance of the gustatio to extreme lengths, serving highly unusual or exotic appetizers designed to shock and delight their guests. For instance, peacock's tongues, dormice often fattened and served with honey, or even sea urchins might make an appearance. Imagine the conversation starting with a gasp of surprise, then a murmur of intrigued whispers as a platter of gilded dormice was presented. Historians still argue whether such exotic ingredients were truly enjoyed for their flavor, or if they were primarily status symbols meant to display the host's immense wealth and extensive connections to distant lands. It certainly sounds like a bizarre way to kick off a meal, doesn't it? You might even picture a guest discreetly trying to pass a particularly odd-looking appetizer to a less discerning neighbor. Beyond the food, the gustatio also set the tone for the entire evening. It was a time for initial greetings, light conversation, and perhaps a bit of gentle banter. The wine served with this course, mulsum, was typically a mix of wine and honey meant to be light and sweet, a pleasant welcome to the feast. This introductory phase was crucial. It was the host's first opportunity to demonstrate their hospitality and taste, easing guests into the relaxed, indulgent atmosphere that would define the Roman dinner party and eventually lead to those contented post-meal slumbers. You've just savored the exotic appetizers of the gustatio, a sensory prelude to the main event. Now let's move to the heart of the Roman feast, the primi mensae main courses. Imagine the tantalizing aromas filling the triclinium as platter after platter of rich complex dishes arrived, each a testament to Roman culinary ambition and the host's immense wealth. A mainstream historical fact is that the primi mensae consisted of the principal courses of the Roman dinner, often featuring multiple meat and fish dishes served simultaneously or in quick succession. This wasn't a humble affair like a modern roast dinner. It was a grand display of culinary artistry and a demonstration of the host's ability to procure a vast array of ingredients. You can almost feel the weight of the silver platters being carried in by slaves laden with delicacies. The sheer volume and variety of food were designed to impress, to satiate, and perhaps to slightly overwhelm the senses. Common main dishes included roasted meats like pork, beef, and lamb, often served with rich sauces. Poultry, such as chickens, ducks, and geese, were also popular. Fish and seafood, especially oysters and various types of Mediterranean fish, were highly prized, often imported from distant shore, at great expense. These dishes were seasoned with a wide range of herbs and spices, some local, some brought from the far reaches of the Roman Empire, reflecting the global reach of their trade networks. Think of the intense flavors, spicy, savory, and sweet, often combined in unexpected ways. Here's a quirky tidbit. Roman chefs were known for their elaborate and often deceptive culinary presentations. They might prepare a dish to look like something it wasn't, such as a whole roasted pig that when cut open revealed a live bird, or a platter of seemingly humble vegetables that were actually exquisitely crafted fish. Imagine the gasps of surprise and delight, perhaps followed by a nervous chuckle, as a guest witnessed such a spectacle. Historians still argue whether these culinary theatrics were primarily for entertainment, or if they were also a subtle way for chefs to demonstrate their skill and creativity, pushing the boundaries of what was considered possible in the kitchen. It certainly sounds like a wild dinner party trick, doesn't it? You might even picture a guest carefully examining a dish, trying to discern its true contents before taking a bite. The primi mensae was the core of the feast, designed not just for eating, but for extended enjoyment. The reclining posture on the triclinium couches encouraged slow consumption, allowing for prolonged conversation, appreciation of the food, and ample time for digestion, or lack thereof, as you'll see. It was during this phase that the true scale of Roman hospitality became evident, with food constantly being replenished, ensuring that no guest ever saw the bottom of a platter unless by choice. This relentless abundance was a direct invitation to linger, to indulge, and eventually to surrender to the blissful effects of a truly epic meal. You've indulged in the rich primi mensae, the lavish main courses of the Roman feast. Now, as the last savory flavors linger, it's time for the sweet, often elaborate conclusion, the secondary mensae desserts. Imagine the heavy platters of meat being cleared away, making way for lighter, often artfully presented final dishes. A mainstream historical fact is that the secondary mensae marked the dessert course of a Roman dinner party. While not always as grand in scale as the main courses, these dishes were still an important part of the dining experience, offering a sweet counterpoint to the preceding richness and providing a gentle transition towards the post-dinner revelry. You can almost feel a sense of contentedness settling over the triclinium as these final delights appeared. Common desserts included a variety of fresh fruits, both local and imported, depending on the season and the host's wealth. Grapes, figs, apples, and pomegranates were popular choices. These were often served alongside honey-sweetened pastries, cakes, and even small cheesecakes. Nuts, dates, and dried fruits were also common, offering easily digestible, naturally sweet options. Think of it as a delightful array of nature's candy, sometimes enhanced with a touch of human ingenuity. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Roman desserts were surprisingly sophisticated for their time, demonstrating a good understanding of baking and confectionery. For instance, the Roman cookbook Apicius, which, remember, is like a peek into their culinary world, contains recipes for elaborate cheesecakes, honeyed fried dough, and fruit tarts that wouldn't look out of place on a modern dessert menu. Imagine a Roman chef meticulously crafting a delicate cheesecake adorned with fruit, striving for both flavor and visual appeal. Historians still argue whether these complex dessert recipes were widely accessible or primarily confined to the households of the extremely wealthy, suggesting that simpler fruit-based desserts were more common for most. It's a sweet thought, though, that ancient Romans had a sweet tooth just like us. You might even picture a Roman guest having indulged heavily in the main courses, making just a little more room for that irresistible honeyed pastry. The Secundi Mensae was more than just a sweet ending. It often marked the transition into the Commissatio, the post-dinner drinking party. The lighter fare was thought to aid digestion and prepare the body for the wine that would flow more freely. It was a moment of contented winding down, a final flourish before the serious business of social drinking began. This careful pacing of the meal, from appetizers to main courses to desserts, ensured a long, immersive experience, setting the perfect stage for the inevitable moments of relaxation, and yes, even slumber, that often followed such Roman indulgence. You've indulged in the sweet delights of the Secondae Mensae, the final course of the Roman feast. Now let's uncork the most essential element of Roman conviviality: wine and conviviality. Imagine the clinking of ceramic and glass, the rich aroma of fermented grapes filling the air, as conversation flowed as freely as the wine itself. This wasn't just about drinking. It was a deeply ritualized and significant social act. A mainstream historical fact is that wine was an integral part of nearly every Roman meal, from humble family dinners to lavish banquets. However, Romans rarely drank undiluted wine. It was customary to mix wine with water, typically in a large mixing bowl called a crater. The ratio of wine to water varied, ranging from 1:1 to even 1:4 or 1:5 wine to water, depending on the desired strength and the formality of the occasion. You can almost feel the refreshing coolness of the diluted wine as it touched your lips, a far cry from the potent, undiluted varieties we often enjoy today. This dilution was not just about moderation. It was about extending the period of conviviality, allowing guests to drink for longer without becoming overly intoxicated too quickly. The act of mixing and serving wine was itself a ritual. A designated individual, often a slave called a pincerna, cupbearer, would oversee the mixing, ensuring the proper ratio for the guests. Wine was poured from amphorae, large ceramic jars, into the crater, then ladled into individual drinking cups. This careful process added to the sense of occasion and deliberation, emphasizing that drinking was a controlled social activity rather than a quick gulp. Here's a quirky tidbit: the Romans used various methods to chill or warm their wine. While they didn't have refrigerators, they might use snow packed in special containers or even large urns sunk into cool cellars to chill wine. Conversely, for winter feasts, they might warm wine, sometimes adding spices, creating an early form of mulled wine. Imagine a Roman host proudly presenting a chilled amphora on a hot summer's day, a true luxury for the time. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for diluting wine was temperance, or if it was more about making the wine supply last longer and allowing for extended social gatherings without rapid incapacitation. It certainly seems like a practical way to keep the party going for hours, doesn't it? You might even picture a Roman guest discreetly signaling for a slightly stronger mix, hoping the cupbearer understood. The convivial atmosphere fostered by wine was paramount. It loosened tongues, encouraged storytelling, and deepened bonds between guests. To refuse wine or to drink too much too quickly could be seen as a social faux pas. The aim was a state of pleasant tipsiness where conversation flowed freely and enjoyment was maximized without descending into complete drunkenness. This careful balance between enjoyment and control was key to the Roman appreciation of wine at their feasts, setting the stage for those long, comfortable evenings that sometimes culminated in a gentle drift into sleep. You've just seen how wine fueled Roman conviviality, always diluted, always extending the merriment. Now let's consider a subtle but powerful aspect of every Roman dinner party: social hierarchy at table. Imagine entering the triclinium, not just as a guest, but as a player in an intricate game of status where your very seating position spoke volumes about your standing. A mainstream historical fact is that seating arrangements at a Roman cena were meticulously planned to reflect and reinforce the social hierarchy of the guests. It wasn't a free-for-all. Every couch and every position on that couch had a specific social weight. You can almost feel the unspoken tension and the subtle power dynamics at play as guests navigated the room, hoping to be placed in an advantageous spot. The host's discretion in seating was a potent tool for showing favor or slight. As you recall, the triclinium had three couches in a U-shape. The most prestigious position was typically the highest spot on the middle couch, known as the lectus medius or locus consularis, traditionally reserved for the guest of honor. This position offered excellent views of the room and easy conversation with both the host and other important guests. The hosts themselves would usually occupy a less prestigious spot on the lectissimos, the lowest couch, allowing them to manage the household and interact with slaves more easily. It's a bit ironic, isn't it, that the person throwing the party got a less prime seat, but it was a sign of humility and hospitality. Here's a quirky tidbit: some very ambitious or socially insecure Romans would arrive early at dinner parties not just to be punctual, but to subtly try and influence their seating. They might offer effusive greetings, small gifts, or strategic flattery to the host, hoping to secure a better spot than their usual rank might afford them. Imagine a guest casually lingering near the lectus medius, trying to make themselves indispensable just before the formal seating began, a tiny drama playing out before the feast even properly started. Historians still argue whether these maneuvers were truly effective in regularly altering seating arrangements, or if most hosts adhered rigidly to established social pecking orders. But the very attempt highlights the deep significance Romans placed on their table status. You might even picture a guest carefully observing the host's gestures, trying to decipher where they were truly meant to recline. The precise arrangement of guests was a visual representation of the host's relationships and the guest's social standing. Important clients might be placed closer to the host, while less significant acquaintances might find themselves at the furthest ends of the couches. This system made every dinner party a living diagram of Roman power dynamics, reinforcing who was important, who was on the rise, and who was perhaps just there to fill a space. The food and wine were certainly central, but the silent language of seating arrangements spoke volumes louder, often dictating the flow of conversation and the opportunities for social advancement throughout the long, luxurious evening. You've just seen how rigidly Roman social hierarchy played out in the seating arrangements at dinner. But a feast wasn't just about food, wine, and status. It was a full sensory experience. So let's immerse ourselves in the sounds and sights that accompanied these long evenings. Entertainment during dinner. Imagine not just conversation, but a curated program of performances designed to delight and impress. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman dinner parties, especially those hosted by the wealthy, routinely featured various forms of entertainment throughout the meal. This wasn't incidental, it was an expected part of the elaborate hospitality. You can almost hear the soft strumming of a lyre or the clear voice of a reader cutting through the murmur of conversation, signaling a shift in the evening's rhythm. The entertainment was as much a display of the host's wealth and taste as the food itself, showing they could afford skilled performers. Music was a staple. Musicians, often slaves trained for the purpose, might play instruments like the lyre, a stringed instrument similar to a small harp, the tibia, a wind instrument resembling a double flute, or percussion instruments. Their performances could range from soothing background melodies to more lively tunes accompanying dancing or singing. Think of it as ambient music but performed live and right in your dining room. Here's a quirky tidbit beyond music Roman dinner parties frequently included: poetry readings, or recitations. A host might invite a celebrated poet to read their latest work, or more commonly a well-educated slave, a rea laborius or anagnostes, would read aloud from classical literature, philosophical texts, or even current news reports. Imagine reclining comfortably, glass of diluted wine in hand, listening to the soaring verses of Virgil or a stimulating passage from Cicero. It was a form of intellectual entertainment meant to elevate the conversation and display the host's erudition. Historians still argue whether guests genuinely appreciated these long recitations, or if they sometimes found them tedious, politely feigning interest while secretly wishing for more wine. You might even picture a guest discreetly stifling a yawn during a particularly long epic poem. Other forms of entertainment could be even more diverse. Acrobats might perform astounding feats, dancers might grace the floor, or mime artists could tell stories through movement. Sometimes even gladiatorial fights in miniature or animal acts were presented for the more sensation-seeking hosts. This range of entertainment ensured that the long hours of the cena were always engaging, preventing boredom, and keeping the guests immersed in the opulent experience. The performances served not only to entertain, but also to punctuate the meal, providing natural breaks between courses and allowing for digestion before the next culinary wave arrived. You've just seen the vibrant entertainment that accompanied Roman dinners, from music to poetry. Now let's delve deeper into one of the most significant intellectual traditions that heavily influenced Roman feasting culture: the symposium tradition. Imagine reclining not just for pleasure but for profound philosophical discussion, where wine loosened tongues and sharpened wits. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman practice of lengthy, intellectually stimulating dinner gatherings was heavily inspired by the ancient Greek kthir symposium. In Greece, a symposium, meaning drinking together, was a formal banquet following a meal typically held by aristocratic men, where drinking was accompanied by conversation games, music, dancing, and recitations of poetry. You can almost feel the intellectual buzz in the air, the clash of ideas as much as the clinking of cups. This was a dedicated space for refined discourse, a far cry from a rowdy drinking party. Unlike the Roman cena, which integrated eating and drinking from the start, the Greek symposium typically began after the main meal. The focus then shifted almost entirely to wine philosophical debate and communal intellectual engagement. Rules were often set by a symposiarch, or master of the drinking, who dictated the wine-to-water ratio and the topics of discussion. This emphasis on structured conversation and intellectual pursuits deeply appealed to the more serious-minded Romans who admired Greek philosophy. Here's a quirky tidbit to ensure intellectual focus: Greek symposia sometimes included a form of wine penalty for those who spoke out of turn or failed to contribute meaningfully to the discussion. Imagine a guest eager to share their opinion being forced to drink an extra undiluted cup of wine for interrupting a humorous yet effective way to maintain order and encourage thoughtful participation. Historians still argue whether Romans fully embraced the intellectual rigor of the Greek symposium, or if their adoption was more about the social prestige and aesthetic pleasure of reclining fine wine and entertainment, with the philosophy sometimes taking a back seat. But the concept of a structured, intellectually stimulating post-dinner gathering was undeniably influential. You might even picture a Roman host diligently trying to guide his guests into a profound philosophical debate, only for them to prefer discussing the latest gladiatorial games. The Roman elite adapted the symposium tradition to their own cultural context, integrating its elements into their cena and subsequent commissatio, post-dinner drinking party. They adopted the reclining posture, the emphasis on conversation, the use of entertainment, and even the role of a master of ceremonies, though less formal than the Greek symposiarch. This blending created a unique Roman dining experience where intellectual discussion could easily flow alongside culinary indulgence, allowing for hours of stimulating engagement that often naturally led to a need for rest and perhaps even sleep right there amidst the lingering aromas of the feast. You've just explored the intellectual leanings of the Roman feast drawing from the Greek symposium. Now let's pivot to the after-dinner revelry, when the serious eating wound down and the serious drinking began, the Kame Commissario drinking party. Imagine the main dishes cleared, perhaps some fresh fruit and nuts remaining, and a new energy sparking in the triclinium as the focus shifted entirely to wine and extended merriment. A mainstream historical fact is that the commissatio was a distinct post-dinner drinking session, a common feature of Roman elite social life. This wasn't just a casual topping up of cups. It was a more formalized, often boisterous continuation of the evening, frequently lasting for many hours after the main meal had concluded. You can almost feel the atmosphere shifting, becoming livelier and less formal than during the main courses as guests settled in for the long haul. During the commissatio, wine, still diluted, but sometimes less so than during the meal, was consumed more freely. Often a master of the drinking, arbiter bibendi, or magister convivii, would be chosen, usually by a roll of dice. This individual would set the rules for the drinking, including the wine-to-water ratio for that particular session, the number of cups to be drunk, and sometimes even the topics of conversation or the toast to be made. Think of them as the designated party planner and mood controller for the post-dinner fun. Here's a quirky tidbit: the arbiter Babendi would sometimes issue drinking commands or challenges like requiring everyone to drink a cup for each letter in a specific person's name. E.g., if you were toasting Augustus, that would be 8 cups. Failure to comply could result in a minor social penalty, perhaps being forced to chug a cup or sing a silly song. Imagine the nervous laughter as the arbiter made such a command, everyone counting out their cups, hoping to avoid a comedic punishment. Historians still argue whether these rules were strictly enforced or if they were often used more for playful coercion and to encourage communal participation rather than rigid adherence. But it certainly sounds like a lively way to keep the party moving. You might even picture a particularly clever guest trying to choose short names for their toasts. The Commissatio was a time for uninhibited conversation, witty banter, and communal enjoyment. It allowed for a deeper level of social bonding and often facilitated the exchange of gossip and political intrigue under the guise of festive revelry. As the hours passed and the diluted wine continued to flow, the atmosphere would become increasingly relaxed. It was during this phase that the natural effects of a heavy meal and prolonged lounging, combined with the steady intake of wine, would often begin to take their toll, leading to those contented states of drowsiness, and for some, the gentle drift into a post-dinner slumber, right there on the comfortable couches of the triclinium. You've just seen how the Commissatio extended the Roman evening with structured drinking. Now let's add another layer to the post-dinner revelry, a pastime that could either heighten the excitement or lead to significant losses. Gaming and gambling. Imagine the clatter of dice, the murmur of bets, and the intense focus of players hoping for a turn of luck, all while reclining amidst the lingering aromas of the feast. A mainstream historical fact is that various forms of gaming and gambling were popular activities during Roman dinner parties, particularly during the Commissatio. While not always openly sanctioned, dice games were a common accompaniment to drinking and conversation. You can almost feel the anticipation building as the ivory or bone dice tumbled the fate of small sums of money or even larger bets hanging in the balance. This added an element of thrill and competition to the leisurely evening. The most popular form of gambling involved les souris, known as tesserae. These were typically 6-sided dice, much like modern ones, though sometimes the spots were not consistent in their arrangement. Players would often use a fritillus, a dice box, to shake and throw the dice, adding to the dramatic flair. Bets could range from trivial sums of money to more significant wagers, including property or even slaves, though such high-stakes gambling was generally frowned upon and sometimes illegal. Here's a quirky tidbit: Romans had specific names for different dice throws. For example, the Venus throw, all 4 dice showing different numbers, was considered the luckiest, while the dog throw, all ones, was the worst. Imagine a Roman guest having just rolled the dog throw, letting out a theatrical groan as his companions chuckled at his misfortune. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of gambling at dinner parties was seen as a lighthearted social diversion or a more serious vice that hosts had to manage carefully to prevent outright arguments or ruin among guests. It's certainly a quick way to liven up a slow evening, isn't it? You might even picture a particularly shrewd guest keeping a careful tally of wins and losses, perhaps using their numerical skills to their advantage. Beyond dice, other games were played that involved strategy or chance, though gambling on them was often the primary draw. Board games similar to backgammon, your ludus duodecim scriptorum, or tabula, were also known. The act of gaming provided another focal point for interaction, encouraging friendly rivalry and shared excitement. As the wine flowed and the hours passed, the stakes might subtly rise, adding another layer of indulgence and potential consequence to the Roman dinner party experience. This combination of rich food, ample wine, lively conversation, and engaging games ensured that the Roman evening was a long, immersive affair, further contributing to the likelihood of guests finding themselves drifting into a contented slumber as the night wore on. You've just seen how games and gambling added excitement to the Roman Commissatio. But none of this elaborate feasting and revelry would have been possible without an enormous, largely unseen workforce. So let's shine a light on the crucial backbone of Roman dining and slaves' role in dining. Imagine countless hands moving with practiced efficiency, ensuring every guest was pampered and every dish perfectly presented. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman households, especially those of the wealthy elite, relied heavily on a vast and specialized retinue of slaves to prepare and serve their elaborate dinner parties. These weren't just general laborers. Many were highly skilled and trained, their expertise essential to the smooth operation of a successful feast. You can almost hear the soft padding of bare feet on marble floors, the quiet murmur of instructions as dozens of individuals worked in perfect synchronicity behind the scenes. This dependence on slave labor allowed the Roman elite to indulge in a level of luxury and leisure that would be unimaginable otherwise. The roles were incredibly diverse and specialized. There were chefs, we are in a kuchichai, who oversaw the complex culinary preparations often celebrated for their artistry. There were cupbearers, pensernai, who mixed and served the wine sometimes with great theatricality. Carvers, structores, skillfully dismembered roasted animals at the table, a display of precision and elegance. There were even slaves dedicated to specific tasks like cleaning the floor during the meal, kinaskopari, or managing the lighting, lucernarium. Think of it as a meticulously choreographed ballet, with each slave playing a crucial, defined part. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman hosts would train their slaves not just in service but in social etiquette and even witty banter, so they could subtly participate in conversations or deliver messages with a flair. Imagine a slave discreetly refilling your wine cup, then leaning in slightly to deliver a clever, prearranged quip from the host designed to make you chuckle. Historians still argue whether this practice of allowing slaves to engage in light banter with guests was a genuine attempt at humanization, or if it was another subtle display of the master's power and cultivation, demonstrating that even his servants were refined. It's a fascinating thought, isn't it, that even the servers might be part of the entertainment. You might even picture a guest momentarily forgetting the slave status, engaging in a brief, pleasant exchange, only to quickly remember the strict social boundaries. The sheer number of slaves deployed for a major dinner party was itself a status symbol. A large, well-trained staff indicated immense wealth and power. For the host, it was an effortless display of grandeur. For the guests, it was a guarantee of impeccable service and an uninterrupted flow of food and wine. This elaborate system of service, relying on the unseen efforts of so many, directly contributed to the extended duration and ultimate comfort of the Roman feast, allowing guests to truly relax and perhaps even succumb to the quiet call of slumber. You've just seen the elaborate organization of slave labor that underpin Roman feasts. Now let's consider the incredible efforts that went into filling those abundant tables. Food sourcing and exoticism. Imagine chefs and merchants scouring the known world from distant shores to remote provinces to find ingredients that would tantalize, impress, and sometimes shock their discerning patrons. A mainstream historical fact is that wealthy Romans went to extraordinary lengths to acquire rare and exotic ingredients for their dinner parties, reflecting their vast empire and extensive trade networks. This wasn't just about good food. It was about demonstrating unparalleled wealth power and global reach. You can almost feel the excitement of a host announcing a dish prepared with spices from India or fish from the Atlantic, a culinary journey presented right on their dining table. This quest for the exotic pushed the boundaries of Roman cuisine and logistics. Ingredients traveled vast distances. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, and cloves came from the east, often via long and dangerous trade routes. Delicacies such as peacocks, flamingos, and even dormice. Yes, remember those from the gustaccio were specially bred or hunted. Fish and shellfish were often sourced from specific distant regions, known for their quality, sometimes transported live in specially designed tanks. Think of the intricate supply chains, the sheer cost, and the dedication involved in bringing these items to a Roman kitchen. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman gourmands became obsessed with the freshness of certain seafood, famously demanding that highly prized fish like red mullet be brought directly from the sea to the dining room alive, to be killed and cooked immediately before the guests' eyes. Imagine the spectacle: a live fish flopping on a platter, then swiftly dispatched and prepared, a morbid yet fascinating display of ultimate freshness and extravagance. Historians still argue whether this practice was primarily for optimal flavor or a grotesque display of wealth and power, a subtle reminder that the host could command life itself. It certainly sounds like a bizarre dinner show, doesn't it? You might even picture a guest initially amused, then slightly queasy as they watch such a dramatic presentation. The pursuit of exotic ingredients was also a form of competitive display among the Roman elite. To serve something no one else had, or to serve it with an unparalleled level of freshness, elevated one's status. It was a subtle form of boasting, a way to show off connections, resources, and discerning taste without uttering a single word. This relentless quest for the rare and the unusual directly contributed to the sensory overload of Roman feasts, ensuring that every course offered not just sustenance, but also a spectacle, further cementing the long, luxurious evenings where contentedness and perhaps a touch of drowsiness were the inevitable result. You've just glimpsed the fascinating, sometimes morbid extremes of Roman food sourcing. Now let's go behind the scenes, beyond the lavish dining room and into the busy heart of the Roman culinary world. Cooking techniques and kitchens. Imagine the heat, the clamor, and the specialized tools used to transform raw ingredients into those elaborate feast day dishes. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman kitchens, culinae, were often separate bustling areas within the household, especially in larger villas designed for efficiency and to keep the heat and smoke away from the main living quarters. These weren't quiet, pristine spaces. They were hives of activity, often manned by numerous specialized slaves working in a controlled chaos. You can almost feel the warmth radiating from the ovens, the clang of metal on metal, and the earthy aroma of roasting meats mingling with pungent spices. Roman cooking techniques were surprisingly sophisticated. They utilized various methods including roasting, boiling, frying, and stewing. Ovens as made of brick or clay were common for baking bread and pastries or roasting larger cuts of meat. Hearths with open flames were used for grilling and boiling. They also used specialized cooking vessels, including bronze or earthenware pots, pans, and griddles. Think of it as a well-equipped, if not aesthetically pleasing, culinary workshop. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Romans were masters of sauces and seasonings, often using complex combinations of herbs, spices, and fermented fish sauce, crui garum, to flavor their dishes. Rather than relying on a single dominant flavor, they often aim for a harmonious blend of sweet, sour, salty, and savory, sometimes creating dishes that might seem unusual to modern palates. Imagine a Roman chef meticulously grinding exotic spices with a mortar and pestle, adding pinches of this and dashes of that, crafting a sauce with layers of subtle flavor. Historians still argue whether the Roman emphasis on heavily spiced and sauced dishes was primarily to mask the taste of less than fresh ingredients, a common problem before refrigeration, or if it was purely a matter of culinary preference and a desire for bold, complex flavors. It certainly sounds like they weren't shy with their seasonings, were they? You might even picture a Roman cook with a knowing wink adding a little extra garum to a dish, confident in their secret ingredient. The kitchen was often a noisy and smoky environment, a stark contrast to the refined atmosphere of the triclinium. It was a practical, functional space where efficiency was key. The sheer volume of food required for a large cena meant that preparation could take hours, often beginning well before dawn. This industrious activity in the kitchen, largely hidden from the guests, was absolutely essential for creating the indulgent feasts that defined Roman hospitality and often led to those contented post-dinner slumbers. It was a reminder that even the most opulent displays of leisure were built on a foundation of relentless labor. You've just peered into the bustling Roman kitchen, the hidden engine of their feasts. Now let's tackle a widely perpetuated misconception and discuss the actual practices surrounding eating and cleanliness at Roman dinner parties. Hygiene and vomitoriums myth. Imagine for a moment the popular yet entirely false image of Romans excusing themselves to a special room for, well, exactly what the myth suggests. A mainstream historical fact is that the idea of Romans having a vomitorium for guests to purge themselves during a feast is a persistent urban legend completely debunked by archaeological and textual evidence. A vomitorium was actually an architectural feature in ancient amphitheaters and theaters. a wide entrance or exit passage through which crowds could spew forth from the Latin vomere to spew rapidly. It had absolutely nothing to do with vomiting after a meal. You can almost feel the collective sigh of relief from historians who constantly have to correct this pervasive misunderstanding. The Romans might have been extravagant, but they weren't quite so theatrical with their digestion. While they didn't have designated purging rooms, Romans did care about hygiene and comfort at their banquets, albeit by their own standards. Guests would typically remove their sandals upon entering the triclinium and would have their hands washed before and sometimes during the meal by slaves. This was a common courtesy, ensuring cleanliness, especially since eating with fingers was the norm for many dishes. Here's a quirky tidbit: despite the lack of a vomitorium, if a Roman did need to relieve themselves or felt unwell during a long feast, they would simply excuse themselves to a private room or a latrine, just as people do today. However, some historical sources do hint at individuals intentionally inducing vomiting, though this was considered a private and somewhat scandalous practice, not a formal public ritual of the dinner party. Imagine a particularly gluttonous guest discreetly slipping away perhaps, with a slight green tinge to their face, hoping no one noticed. Historians still argue whether such practices of self-induced purging were truly common among the elite, or if they were extreme behaviors limited to a very small, truly decadent few, perhaps exaggerated by moralizing writers. But it's important to separate the myth from the isolated, often scandalous reality. You might even picture a Roman host subtly checking if any guest looked too unwell, perhaps a silent cue for a slave to discreetly lead them away. So while the image of the vomitorium is vivid, it's a fiction. Roman dining, for all its opulence and extended duration, maintained a certain decorum, even when guests were indulging to excess. The emphasis was on prolonged enjoyment, conviviality, and comfort, creating an atmosphere where a natural, contented slumber after a heavy meal was a far more common and accepted outcome than any dramatic purging. You've just debunked the pervasive vomitorium myth, bringing a more accurate understanding of Roman dining hygiene. Now let's consider how one even got to attend these grand affairs. The dinner invitation. Imagine the anticipation of receiving a coveted summons to a wealthy patron's house, knowing that it was not just a meal, but a crucial social event. A mainstream historical fact is that formal invitations were typically extended for Roman dinner parties, especially for significant ceni. These weren't casual last-minute texts. They were often verbal, delivered by a slave or a client of the host, or sometimes written on a small, wax-covered tablet, pugiaries, or a piece of papyrus. You can almost feel the weight of expectation as a messenger arrived, the future of your evening, and perhaps your social standing, resting on the contents of that message. The invitation itself was a statement of social connection and importance. The invitation would usually specify the time the dinner was to begin, often around the ninth hour, approximately 3 p.m. in modern time, though this shifted with the seasons. It might also indicate the host, the occasion, and sometimes even the type of food or entertainment to be expected, hinting at the grandeur of the evening. Punctuality was generally expected, though arriving slightly late for a very grand host could sometimes be seen as a subtle power move, as if to say, "My time is as valuable as yours." Here's a quirky tidbit: guests were sometimes expected to bring their own napkin, mappa, to a Roman dinner party, not just for personal hygiene, but often to carry away leftovers or gifts from the host at the end of the evening. Imagine a guest discreetly folding their mappa to make room for a choice piece of roasted peacock or a particularly delicious pastry, a common and accepted practice. Historians still argue whether this practice was primarily about practicality, saving the host from providing too many napkins, or if it was a subtle way to encourage guests to appreciate the bounty and carry some of it home, further advertising the host's generosity. It certainly sounds like a sensible way to handle leftovers, doesn't it? You might even picture a particularly enthusiastic guest bringing an extra-large mappa just in case. Beyond the formal invitation, the network of clients and patrons played a significant role. Clients would often be invited to their patrons' dinners, a way for the patron to display their wealth and influence, and for the clients to show deference and seek favors. The guest list was carefully curated, a delicate balance of social obligations, political alliances, and genuine friendships. The act of inviting and being invited was a complex social dance, a key ritual that underscored the importance of the cena as a pillar of Roman social life, setting the stage for those long, luxurious evenings where convivial enjoyment could and often did transition into a comfortable slumber. You've just uncovered the intricate process of Roman dinner invitations. Now let's consider what happened once you actually arrived. Guest etiquette and manners. Imagine stepping into that triclinium, not just with an appetite, but with a keen awareness of the unwritten rules and social expectations that govern every gesture and word. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman dinner parties were governed by a complex, often unspoken code of etiquette and manners. This wasn't simply about being polite, it was about demonstrating one's social refinement, respect for the host, and understanding of the nuanced social dynamics of the Roman elite. You can almost feel the subtle pressure to conform to make the right impression as you navigated the convivial yet formal atmosphere. A misstep in etiquette could lead to embarrassment or even damage one's social standing. Upon arrival, guests would typically be greeted by slaves who would assist them in removing their sandals and washing their hands and feet. This act of purification was not just practical, it was symbolic, signaling the transition from the bustling outside world to the relaxed, intimate setting of the feast. Once reclined on the lecti, guests were expected to engage in lively but respectful conversation, contributing to the general merriment without dominating the discourse. Think of it as a carefully orchestrated symphony of social interaction. Here's a quirky tidbit. It was considered poor form to talk too much about business or serious political matters during the initial courses of the cena. The early part of the meal was typically reserved for lighter topics, gossip and witty banter, allowing guests to relax and ease into the evening. Serious discussions were usually deferred until the commissario, the drinking party, or even later when the wine had loosened tongues and formality had somewhat dissipated. Imagine a particularly eager guest trying to pitch a business deal during the gustaccio, only to be met with polite yet firm redirection from the host. Historians still argue whether this separation of serious topics was a genuine preference for initial lightheartedness or a strategic way for hosts to control the flow of potentially contentious conversations, ensuring no awkwardness disrupted the early courses. It certainly sounds like a good way to enjoy your appetizers without too much stress, doesn't it? You might even picture a guest discreetly trying to steer a conversation away from anything too heavy, ensuring the mood remained light. Guests were also expected to praise the food show appreciation for the host's generosity and engage with the various forms of entertainment provided. Excessive drunkenness was generally frowned upon, despite the free flow of wine, as it could lead to unruly behavior and a loss of dignity. The goal was a state of pleasant conviviality where everyone felt comfortable and relaxed, contributing to an enjoyable experience for all. This careful adherence to etiquette ensured that the long Roman dinner party, designed for both indulgence and social networking, could proceed smoothly, setting the stage for comfortable lounging and often a contented drift into slumber. You've just navigated the intricate world of Roman dinner etiquette. Now let's consider the different scales of these grand gatherings, public versus private feasts. Imagine the hushed intimacy of a small group of friends gathered in a triclinium versus the echoing grandeur of hundreds dining in a public space, each serving very different social and political purposes. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman dining manifested in two primary forms: intimate private dinners held within individual homes and grand public banquets often sponsored by wealthy individuals or the state. These two types of feasts serve distinct functions in Roman society. You can almost feel the difference in atmosphere from the cozy warmth of a domestic setting to the awe-inspiring scale of a large public event. Private feasts, or cinae, were the cornerstone of daily social life for the Roman elite. These were typically held in the host's triclinium and involved a carefully curated guest list of family, close friends, trusted clients, and important social or political allies. The intimacy of these gatherings allowed for more personal conversation, discreet networking, and a deeper display of individual hospitality. Think of it as a sophisticated networking event disguised as a friendly dinner. The host could control every detail from the food to the entertainment, ensuring a highly personalized experience. Here's a quirky tidbit: some very private Roman dinner parties were so exclusive that guests might be sworn to secrecy about the discussions or events that transpired, particularly if sensitive political matters were being discussed. Imagine attending a feast knowing that every word spoken was meant to stay within that triclinium, a weighty responsibility, even amidst the conviviality. Historians still argue whether such oaths of secrecy were truly effective, or if they were more a symbolic gesture to emphasize the importance and trust placed in the invited guests. But it certainly highlights the delicate balance between social gathering and serious business. You might even picture a guest carefully choosing their words, aware that the private nature of the feast didn't mean absolute privacy. Public banquets. On the other hand, were massive affairs often held in temples, basilicas, or specially constructed temporary dining halls. These were typically sponsored by emperors, senators, or wealthy magistrates for a multitude of reasons, celebrating military victories, marking religious festivals, gaining public favor, or distributing largesse to the populace. These events were less about intimate conversation and more about spectacle display and cementing political power through public generosity. Imagine hundreds, perhaps thousands of citizens feasting on a grand scale, the air filled with noise and excitement, a powerful demonstration of the patron's influence. While the private cena fostered personal bonds, the public banquet was about civic spectacle and mass appeal. Both, however, contributed to the Roman culture of prolonged, elaborate dining, which by its very nature often created the conditions for guests to linger and even succumb to a comfortable post-meal slumber. You've just explored the vast differences between intimate private feasts and grand public banquets. Now let's consider what the Romans wore to these multi-hour affairs, as their clothing choices were as deliberate as their seating arrangements. Dining attire. The synthesis. Imagine slipping into a specialized garment designed for comfort, not active movement, specifically for the act of reclining and feasting. A mainstream historical fact is that for formal dinner parties, Roman men typically changed out of their everyday togas or tunics into a more comfortable garment known as the synthesis. This wasn't just a casual outfit. It was a specific type of loose-fitting, colorful dress or tunic, often worn over a lighter undergarment. You can almost feel the soft fabric against your skin, designed to allow for ease of movement, or rather lack thereof, while reclining and to accommodate a distending stomach. This shift in attire signaled the transition from the serious business of the day to the relaxed indulgence of the evening. The synthesis often came in vibrant colors and luxurious fabrics, a stark contrast to the austere white of the toga. It was a garment specifically associated with leisure and pleasure, allowing for greater freedom than the restrictive toga, which was primarily worn for public life and formal occasions. Wealthy Romans might even have multiple syntheses to change into during a long feast, especially if one became stained or uncomfortable from hours of reclining and dining. Here's a quirky tidbit: the synthesis was sometimes considered so informal that wearing it outside of a dining context could be seen as scandalous or inappropriate. It was truly a garment of the private, indulgent sphere. Imagine a Roman attempting to conduct business or appear in the forum dressed in his brightly colored synthesis. He'd be met with stares and whispers, a clear breach of social decorum. Historians still argue whether the synthesis was a single universally recognized garment, or if it encompassed a broader range of comfortable, less formal attire, worn for dining with variations in style and name across different periods and regions. But the underlying principle of a dedicated dining outfit remained consistent. You might even picture a Roman host subtly judging his guests' syntheses, noting who had the most fashionable and luxurious fabric. For women, while their formal attire was generally more decorative than men's, they too would likely opt for comfortable flowing garments suitable for reclining. The emphasis was always on ease and luxury, allowing for the prolonged enjoyment of the meal without the constraint of more formal daytime wear. This deliberate choice of clothing further underscores the Roman dedication to the art of dining, transforming the simple act of eating into a multi-sensory experience that prioritized comfort and relaxation, setting the perfect stage for those inevitable, contented post-meal slumbers. You've just explored the specialized attire Romans donned for their feasts. Now let's turn our attention to the philosophical and even spiritual layers sometimes added to their meals. Symbolism of food. Imagine dishes served not just for their taste or rarity, but for deeper meanings hinting at cosmology, prosperity, or even mortality. A mainstream historical fact is that certain foods at Roman banquets carried symbolic meanings reflecting cultural beliefs, religious practices, or philosophical ideas. While not every dish was imbued with deep symbolism, careful hosts sometimes used specific ingredients or presentations to subtly convey messages to their guests. You can almost feel the intellectual undercurrent, the layers of meaning beneath the culinary artistry, as a Roman guest pondered a dish not just with their palate, but with their mind. For example, eggs were often served at the beginning of a meal as part of the gustatio, symbolizing creation, new beginnings, or the cycle of life. Similarly, nuts and fruits often served at the second-day mensae could represent prosperity, fertility, or the bounty of nature. Think of a host presenting a platter of ripe figs not just as a sweet treat, but as a subtle nod to abundance and the fruits of labor. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman hosts would employ elaborate culinary presentations that were explicitly allegorical, using food to tell stories or represent abstract concepts. For instance, a dish might be shaped or arranged to depict a battle scene, a mythological creature, or even a miniature landscape, all crafted from edible ingredients. Imagine a guest marveling at a tableau of roasted birds and sculpted vegetables, forming a scene from the Trojan War, a feast for the eyes and the intellect. Historians still argue whether such elaborate edible allegories were widely understood by all guests, or if they were often designed for a more educated elite, showcasing the host's erudition as much as their chef's skill. But it certainly sounds like a memorable dinner, doesn't it? You might even picture a guest after a few cups of diluted wine trying to interpret the hidden meanings in an elaborate food sculpture, perhaps with a humorous, slightly off-kilter analysis. The symbolism of food also extended to less direct forms. The very act of sharing a meal was deeply symbolic of community trust and social bonding. Breaking bread, or in this case, sharing poles with someone, was a powerful gesture of fellowship. The inclusion of exotic ingredients, while primarily a display of wealth, could also symbolize Rome's vast imperial reach and its ability to gather the riches of the world onto its tables. This layering of meaning, where sustenance met philosophy and spectacle, contributed to the profound significance of the Roman cena, making it a truly immersive experience that engaged guests on multiple levels, paving the way for those long, contemplative evenings that often ended in peaceful slumber. You've just considered the symbolic layers embedded within Roman food. Now let's turn to a more pragmatic yet equally vital aspect of Roman feasting: dinner as political tool. Imagine the soft glow of oil lamps, the clinking of glasses, and the murmur of conversation, knowing that beneath the conviviality, strategic alliances were being forged, influence was being wielded, and political futures were being subtly shaped. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman dinner parties were far more than just social gatherings. They were crucial arenas for political networking, influence peddling, and even covert deal-making. For the ambitious Roman elite, the cena was an indispensable tool for career advancement and maintaining power. You can almost feel the weight of unspoken expectations, the subtle shifts in power dynamics as a senator navigated conversations, gauging loyalties and subtly advancing his agenda. Hosts would meticulously curate their guest lists, inviting individuals whose support was needed, whose influence was valuable, or whose loyalty needed to be cultivated. A prominent guest might be placed strategically to allow for private conversations with a key political ally, or an up-and-coming politician might be given a rare opportunity to impress a powerful patron. The relaxed atmosphere of the triclinium, fueled by wine and good food, allowed for discussions that might be too formal or too risky in the public forum. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman hosts would deliberately invite feuding political rivals to the same dinner party, subtly forcing them into a convivial setting where direct confrontation was difficult. The hope was that the shared food and wine, combined with the pressure of social decorum, might encourage them to set aside their differences, or at least engage in civil discourse, potentially leading to a truce or a new understanding. Imagine two arch rivals forced to recline on adjacent couches, politely exchanging pleasantries while secretly plotting each other's downfall. Historians still argue whether such attempts at dinner diplomacy were genuinely successful in bridging political divides, or if they often merely provided a temporary truce only for hostilities to resume with renewed vigor the next day. But it certainly highlights the belief in the power of shared meals to influence even the most intractable conflicts. You might even picture a host subtly signaling to his slaves to keep the wine flowing, hoping it would soften the edges of the hardened politicians. Beyond the immediate networking, dinner parties were also opportunities for hosts to publicly display their generosity and wealth, crucial elements for gaining popular support and maintaining one's standing in Roman society. A lavish feast was a visible testament to a patron's resources and influence, strengthening their network of clients and supporters. Thus, the Roman dinner party was a sophisticated blend of pleasure and politics, where the boundaries between the two were often deliciously blurred, ensuring that these long, indulgent evenings were never just about filling the stomach, but always about filling the coffers of power, eventually leading to a satisfied, perhaps weary slumber. You've just seen how Roman dinner parties were cunningly used as political tools. Now let's explore the flip side of that coin: attempts by the Roman government to curb such extravagance through sumptuary laws. Imagine stern senators debating the morality of excessive feasting, trying to legislate against the very displays of wealth that define their society. A mainstream historical fact is that, throughout various periods of Roman history, sumptuary laws were enacted to restrict private extravagance, particularly regarding feasts and personal display. These laws were typically driven by moralistic concerns, aiming to preserve traditional Roman virtues of frugality and modesty, and to curb what was perceived as excessive luxury and a sign of societal decay. You can almost feel the tension between the desire for opulent display and the legislative attempts to rein it in. Several sumptuary laws targeted dinner parties directly. For instance, the Reuace Lex Fania of 161 BC limited the expense of banquets and the number of guests one could invite. Other laws might specify the types of dishes allowed or even the weight of certain meats that could be served. Think of a senator meticulously reviewing a guest list or a menu, trying to ensure he remained within the legal limits, perhaps with a slight groan of frustration. These laws were notoriously difficult to enforce, often circumvented by clever hosts and guests who found loopholes or simply ignored them. Here's a quirky tidbit: to bypass restrictions on the number of courses or types of food, some hosts would engage in elaborate subterfuge. They might serve multiple dishes under a single course designation, or use highly disguised preparations to present forbidden ingredients in a new form. Imagine a Roman chef with a mischievous twinkle in his eye, carefully shaping a dish of humble lentils to resemble a forbidden pheasant, a culinary sleight of hand designed to fool the inspectors. Historians still argue whether these sumptuary laws were truly effective in curbing extravagance, or if they primarily served as a moralistic gesture, often ignored by the very elite they were meant to control. It certainly sounds like a cat-and-mouse game between legislators and lavish hosts, doesn't it? You might even picture a guest discreetly exchanging glances with the host, sharing a silent chuckle over a cleverly disguised dish. The very existence of sumptuary laws highlights the immense importance placed on dinner parties as a form of status display. If the government felt the need to regulate them, it shows just how central they were to Roman social and economic life. Despite these legislative attempts, the drive for lavish entertainment and the desire to impress guests ultimately prevailed for the wealthy elite. The sumptuary laws were a testament to the persistent tension between Roman ideals of austerity and the reality of their growing opulence, ensuring that the elaborate, prolonged dinner parties, conducive to relaxed conversation and eventual slumber, continued to be a defining feature of Roman life. You've just seen the Roman government's ultimately futile attempts to legislate against lavish feasts. Now let's explore how these prolonged gatherings weren't just for eating and politicking, but also for intellectual stimulation. Dining and philosophy. Imagine reclining amidst the aromas of a rich meal, not just engaging in gossip, but delving into profound questions about life ethics and the nature of the universe. A mainstream historical fact is that philosophical discussions were a common and highly valued aspect of Roman dinner parties, particularly among the educated elite. Drawing heavily from the Greek symposium tradition, Roman hosts often cultivated an atmosphere where intellectual discourse was as much a part of the evening's entertainment as music or poetry. You can almost feel the mental gears turning, the thoughtful pauses in conversation as guests engaged in stimulating debate. For many Romans, a truly successful dinner party wasn't just about good food, it was about good ideas. Philosophers like Cicero Seneca and Pliny the Younger often describe such intellectual gatherings in their writings, painting a picture of convivial evenings where serious topics were discussed with wit and erudition. Guests might debate ethical dilemmas, interpret classical texts, or discuss the latest philosophical trends, often guided by the host or a specially invited scholar. Think of it as a rolling seminar with delicious food and diluted wine as a pleasant accompaniment. Here's a quirky tidbit to ensure the intellectual tone was maintained. Some hosts would subtly discourage frivolous gossip or overly boisterous behavior by steering the conversation back to more profound topics. They might pose a specific philosophical question as a kind of dinner challenge, or even have a slave read a short, thought-provoking passage from a philosophical text to prompt discussion. Imagine a guest attempting to tell a scandalous anecdote only for the host to smoothly interject with, "But what, my dear friend, truly constitutes happiness in this fleeting life?" Historians still argue whether these philosophical conversations were truly spontaneous and deeply engaging for all, or if they were sometimes a performative display of intellectualism with guests feigning interest to impress their peers or the host. But the aspiration for intellectual engagement was clearly present. You might even picture a guest after a particularly heavy meal trying to summon the mental energy to engage in a debate about Stoic virtue. This blend of dining and philosophy allowed for a unique kind of social interaction where the mind was as engaged as the palate. The long hours of the cena in Comissatio provided ample time for such deep dives into intellectual matters, fostering a rich environment for learning and debate. It was a reminder that for the Romans, true luxury involved not just material wealth, but also the cultivation of the mind. This intellectual stimulation, combined with the physical comforts of reclining and the steady flow of wine, further contributed to the relaxed and contemplative atmosphere that often culminated in a contented post-meal slumber, the mind tired but enriched. You've just explored the intellectual feast where Romans blended dining with philosophy. Now let's consider how they understood the very process of consuming all that food and the impact it had on the body. Medical views on digestion. Imagine a Roman physician clad in a toga pondering the intricate workings of the stomach and liver, offering advice on how to best handle a lavish meal. A mainstream historical fact is that ancient Roman medicine, heavily influenced by Greek theories, held specific beliefs about digestion, often linking it directly to overall health and well-being. Physicians like Galen, whose influence lasted for centuries, posited that digestion was a process of cooking or concoction in the stomach involving internal heat. You can almost feel the imagined warmth in your own belly as you picture their understanding of this vital process. This concept of internal heat influenced their dietary advice and post-meal practices. Romans believed that different foods had different qualities, hot or cold, wet or dry, and that a balanced diet meant consuming foods that maintained harmony within the body's humors. A heavy, rich meal like a cena was seen as producing a lot of heat and requiring significant digestive effort. They often advised moderation, though ironically, their feasts often defied this counsel. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman physicians recommended light exercise or even a short, gentle walk after a meal to aid digestion, believing it helped to distribute the concocted food throughout the body. However, after particularly heavy meals, prolonged rest was also considered beneficial, allowing the body to dedicate all its energy to the arduous task of digestion. Imagine a Roman guest having just consumed an enormous meal, perhaps being gently encouraged to take a short stroll around the peristyle garden before settling down on the couch for serious relaxation. Historians still argue whether these medical recommendations were widely followed by the elite, who often prioritized indulgence, or if they were often disregarded in favor of continued conviviality and lounging. It certainly sounds like a good excuse to relax after a big dinner, doesn't it? You might even picture a Roman doctor with a sigh advising a particularly gluttonous patron that moderation, not another dormouse, was the true path to health. The Roman understanding of digestion also influenced their choices of food pairings and the progression of courses. Lighter foods were often served first to open the stomach, followed by heavier meats and then lighter desserts to close it or to aid in the final stages of digestion. This thoughtful, albeit sometimes scientifically inaccurate approach to meal planning suggests a genuine concern for digestive comfort even amidst the opulence. This focus on maximizing digestive efficiency, whether through a post-meal stroll or simply extended reclining, contributed to the overall atmosphere of comfort and ease at Roman dinner parties, setting the stage for those long, luxurious evenings that culminated in well-earned rest and often a peaceful slumber. You've just explored the Roman medical understanding of digestion after a heavy meal. Now let's make a direct connection to our central theme, sleep rituals post-dinner. Imagine the long hours of eating, drinking, and conversing finally winding down and a natural weariness settling over the triclinium. What happened next? A mainstream historical fact is that after elaborate and prolonged Roman dinners, it was very common for guests to linger, relax, and often drift into a state of semi-sleep or even full slumber right there on their reclining couches. This wasn't considered rude or unusual. It was a natural and accepted consequence of such extended indulgence. You can almost feel the deep contentment, the heavy eyelids, as the rich food and diluted wine did their work easing you into a gentle doze amidst the fading chatter. The very design of the triclinium, with its comfortable cushioned couches, made this natural transition to rest entirely conducive. These weren't stiff benches. They were designed for maximum comfort and relaxation, encouraging guests to recline for hours. After multiple courses, copious amounts of wine, and hours of conversation and entertainment, the body would naturally seek rest. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman hosts would even have slaves quietly adjust cushions or cover gently sleeping guests with light blankets, ensuring their comfort. This wasn't just practical, it was a final act of hospitality, demonstrating the host's complete dedication to their guests' well-being and relaxation, even in their unconscious moments. Imagine being a guest stirring slightly as a slave softly adjusted your pillow, a silent acknowledgement of your comfortable slumber. Historians still argue whether this acceptance of post-dinner sleep was primarily a pragmatic response to the sheer length of the feast, or if it was also a subtle display of luxury, indicating that the host could afford the time and comfort for guests to simply relax and recuperate on their premises. It certainly sounds like a very hospitable custom, doesn't it? You might even picture a Roman host glancing around his triclinium, quietly pleased to see several guests comfortably dozing, a testament to the success of his feast. This practice wasn't always about a full night's sleep. Sometimes it was a leisurely nap, a chance to digest and recharge before perhaps continuing the conversatio with renewed vigor or heading home later. But for some, especially if their own homes were distant or the hour grew very late, these post-dinner slumbers could easily transition into an overnight stay. This blurred boundary between dining and resting highlights the Roman dedication to extended leisure and social pleasure, where the comfort of the guest was paramount, even if it meant a temporary surrender to the arms of Morpheus right there on the dining couch. You've just explored the delightful practice of post-dinner slumbers in the triclinium. Now let's widen our gaze to the broader context of a Roman evening, understanding how their day truly ended. The Roman night knocks. Imagine the vibrant daytime bustle of the forum, fading the clatter of carts, giving way to a different kind of life under the cloak of darkness. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman notions of night were quite different from ours. Without widespread artificial lighting, the hours of darkness were genuinely dark, and public life largely ceased. Most Romans rose with the sun and conducted their business during daylight hours. You can almost feel the quiet stillness descending as dusk turned to true night, a stark contrast to our brightly lit urban landscapes. This shift to darkness profoundly influenced evening activities and the comfort of the cenas. For the elite, however, night wasn't necessarily for immediate sleep. After the main meal, the cena, and the subsequent drinking party, the conversatio, the evening could stretch for many hours. For some, it was a time for quiet reflection or intimate conversation. For others, particularly in the urban centers, it was a time for discreet social calls or even clandestine meetings, though venturing out after dark could be risky, especially for those without a retinue of slaves carrying torches. Here's a quirky tidbit. Wealthy Romans often had slaves whose sole job was to light the household's oil lamps and torches as dusk fell, and then to extinguish them in the morning. These lucernari were essential for extending the hours of comfort and visibility within the villa. Imagine a slave moving silently through the villa, systematically bringing each room to life with flickering light, a meticulous ritual marking the transition from day to night. Historians still argue whether the perceived dangers of Roman knights, bandits, unruly elements were genuinely widespread, or if they were often exaggerated by moralizing writers who disapproved of excessive nocturnal revelry. But the very fear highlights the different realities of life after dark. You might even picture a Roman guest having stayed late, nervously contemplating the journey home through the unlit streets, perhaps wishing they could just stay until morning. The Roman concept of night was thus a blend of practicality, potential danger, and for the elite, a private space for prolonged leisure and social engagement that transcended the boundaries of daylight. The long, leisurely dinners seamlessly transitioned into this extended evening with comfort and conviviality prioritized. This understanding of Knox as a time for relaxation, social bonding, and less formal interaction is crucial to grasping why staying, even dozing, at a host's home after a feast was so commonly accepted. The party didn't necessarily end with the last dish. It merely moved into a different phase embraced by the encompassing Roman night. You've just considered the Roman night itself a time of both quiet and clandestine activity. Now let's illuminate that darkness literally by focusing on lighting and atmosphere. Within the Roman villa during those long evening feasts, imagine the interplay of shadows and light creating a particular ambiance that encouraged relaxation and intimacy. A mainstream historical fact is that Roman villas relied primarily on oil lamps and to a lesser extent candles for illumination after sunset. There was no electricity, no bright overhead lighting. Every lumen of light was painstakingly produced. You can almost feel the soft, flickering glow casting dancing shadows on the frescoes and mosaics, lending a warm, intimate, yet sometimes dim atmosphere to the triclinium. This natural, subdued lighting was inherently conducive to relaxation and the gradual onset of drowsiness. Oil lamps, typically made of terracotta or bronze, were the most common form of lighting. These small lamps filled with olive oil and a wick would be placed on table shelves or hung from ceilings. Wealthier households might have hundreds of these lamps meticulously lit and maintained by slaves, lucernari, creating a significant, though still diffuse amount of light. The subtle scent of olive oil burning would also have been part of the sensory experience. Here's a quirky tidbit to enhance the ambiance. Some Roman hosts would use perfumed oils in their lamps, infusing the air with pleasant aromas like frankincense, myrrh, or various floral scents. This created a multi-sensory experience combining visual warmth with a delightful fragrance, adding another layer of luxury to the dining environment. Imagine the delicate scent of roses subtly wafting through the triclinium as you reclined, a truly indulgent touch. Historians still argue whether these perfumed lamps were common practice or a rare extravagance, but the effort to manipulate the atmosphere was clearly present. You might even picture a Roman guest inhaling deeply, appreciating the luxurious scent as much as the food and wine. The interplay of light and shadow created by these numerous scattered light sources contributed significantly to the relaxed atmosphere of the Roman dinner party. Bright, harsh light was not possible, nor was it desired. The gentle flickering encouraged a slower pace, less energetic movement, and a more contemplative or intimate form of conversation. It was an environment designed for lingering for comfort and for the gradual winding down of the day into a state of contented ease. This subdued, warm illumination, combined with the heavy meal and wine, perfectly set the stage for those delightful post-dinner slumbers, where the soft light would gently fade as guests drifted off. You've just been bathed in the soft, flickering light of a Roman dinner party. Now let's sink even deeper into the comfort that facilitated those long, luxurious evenings. Comfort and cushions. Imagine the feeling of soft fabrics, plush fillings, and the perfect support as you recline for hours, the very furniture designed to encourage relaxation and ease. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roman lecti dining couches were not just hard wooden benches, but were often sumptuously padded with mattresses and adorned with numerous cushions. These were designed for ultimate comfort, reflecting the high value Romans placed on leisure and bodily ease during their feasts. You can almost feel the softness beneath you, the gentle support for your head and back as you settled into your reclining position. This dedication to physical comfort was paramount for meals that could last for hours. The cushions would have been stuffed with a variety of materials from natural fibers like wool or linen to more luxurious fillings like feathers depending on the wealth of the household. They would have been covered in fine fabrics such as linen silk or elaborately embroidered wool, often in rich colors like deep red purple or indigo, adding to the visual opulence of the triclinium. Think of it as ancient Roman memory foam, but much more decorative. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman hosts took pride in displaying their wealth through the sheer number and quality of their cushions, seeing them as a status symbol almost as much as their silverware. Imagine a guest discreetly counting the cushions on their couch or admiring the intricate embroidery on their neighbors, a subtle competition playing out in the realm of soft furnishings. Historians still argue whether the extreme comfort of these couches contributed more to the length of the meals or if the length of the meals necessitated such comfort, creating a symbiotic relationship between indulgence and design. But it certainly sounds like a delightful place to drift off to sleep, doesn't it? You might even picture a Roman guest after several hours of feasting, giving a contented sigh as they adjusted a particularly plump feather cushion beneath their head. This emphasis on physical comfort was crucial for the extended duration of Roman dinner parties. The ability to recline in luxury supported by ample cushions made the long hours of eating, drinking, and conversing not just tolerable, but genuinely pleasurable. It minimized discomfort and maximized relaxation, ensuring that guests felt utterly at ease, unhurried, and perfectly positioned for the natural progression from convivial enjoyment to a state of profound contentment, often culminating in that gentle post-meal slumber. The couches and their cushions were in essence an invitation to stay relaxed and eventually fall asleep. You've just been enveloped in the luxurious comfort of Roman dining couches and their plush cushions. Now let's consider what the Romans might have done to aid their bodies after such monumental meals. Digestion aids and practices. Imagine a Roman guest feeling the pleasant fullness after countless courses, reaching for a specific remedy or engaging in a particular ritual to help their stomach cope. A mainstream historical fact is that Romans, keenly aware of the often heavy nature of their feasts, employed various practices and substances believed to aid digestion. This wasn't about modern antacids, it was about ancient wisdom and folk remedies. You can almost feel the gentle rumble in your own stomach as you consider their methods trying to alleviate the burden of indulgence. One common practice was the consumption of ruach chanuyur, light, easily digestible foods, at the end of the meal, such as fruits and nuts, as you recall from the second day mense. These were thought to close the stomach and facilitate digestion without adding further strain. Honey was also frequently consumed either pure or mixed with other ingredients believed to have soothing properties. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Romans were known to use medicinal herbs and spices, specifically for their digestive properties. For instance, cumin was widely used not just as a flavor enhancer, but also for its supposed ability to settle the stomach and reduce bloating. Other herbs like mint or fennel might have been chewed or consumed in infusions after a heavy meal. Imagine a Roman guest discreetly popping a few cumin seeds into their mouth, hoping to ease the after effects of too many roasted dormice. Historians still argue whether these practices were truly effective from a modern scientific standpoint, or if their benefits were primarily psychological, providing comfort and a sense of proactive care. But it certainly shows their dedication to feeling good after overindulging, doesn't it? You might even picture a Roman host with a knowing look offering a small bowl of fragrant herbs to a guest who looked particularly uncomfortable. Beyond specific substances, the act of reclining itself was seen as aiding digestion, as it allowed the body to remain still and focus its energy on processing the large meal. Short, gentle walks in the peristyle garden might also have been encouraged as you remember to subtly move the food through the system before returning to the couches. This combination of herbal remedies, careful food choices, and prolonged rest underscores the Roman commitment to making their lavish feasts as physically comfortable as possible. It was all about maximizing the pleasure of indulgence while minimizing its immediate discomfort, creating an environment where a smooth transition to contented rest and eventual slumber was the ideal outcome. You've just considered the Roman efforts to aid digestion after their elaborate meals. Now let's directly address the fascinating outcome of all this comfort, indulgence, and sustained conviviality. Guests lingering overnight. Imagine the last flickers of the oil lamps, the final murmurs of conversation fading, and finding yourself comfortably settled for the night, not in your own bed, but on your host's dining couch. A mainstream historical fact is that it was a relatively common and accepted practice for guests, particularly after lavish and prolonged cene and conversations, to stay overnight at their host's home. This wasn't an imposition. It was often an expectation, an extension of Roman hospitality, especially among the elite. You can almost feel the gentle acceptance, the lack of pressure to depart, as the evening naturally wound down into a peaceful conclusion. The extended duration of these feasts naturally led to very late hours. When a dinner party began in the late afternoon and continued through the evening and into the deepest hours of the night, the journey home could be impractical, unsafe, or simply undesirable. For a Roman host, offering a place to sleep was not just a convenience. It was a testament to their generosity and their commitment to the comfort and safety of their guests. Here's a quirky tidbit. Sometimes guests would simply fall asleep on the very lecti dining couches they had been reclining on for hours. These couches, designed for maximum comfort with their soft mattresses and numerous cushions, were perfectly suited for an impromptu slumber. In wealthier households, specific slaves might even be tasked with gently covering sleeping guests with light blankets or adjusting their positions for better rest. Imagine a guest stirring in the dim light, realizing they'd simply dozed off mid-conversation, only to be made even more comfortable by a silent, attentive slave. Historians still argue whether this widespread acceptance of overnight stays was primarily due to the practical dangers of night travel in Roman cities, or if it was also a deliberate strategy by hosts to prolong the display of their wealth and hospitality into the next morning. But it certainly sounds like a cozy solution to a very late night, doesn't it? You might even picture a Roman guest after a particularly heavy meal consciously deciding to just let sleep claim them rather than face the cold, dark streets. This practice of overnight lingering wasn't a sign of lack of social graces. Rather, it was a profound illustration of Roman hospitality and the immersive nature of their social gatherings. The boundaries between dining, socializing, and resting were fluid, creating an environment where comfort and camaraderie reigned supreme, allowing the pleasures of the evening to seamlessly transition into a peaceful, often sleep-filled morning. You've just realized that Roman guests often lingered overnight after their grand feasts. Now let's explore the practical and social reasons for overnight stays. Imagine deciding to stay not just because you're too comfortable to move, but because it's genuinely the most sensible or even the most desirable option. A mainstream historical fact is that multiple factors contributed to the commonality of guests staying overnight after elaborate Roman dinner parties. It wasn't merely a sign of extreme indulgence. It was often a matter of convenience, distance, and safety. You can almost feel the chill of the night air, the potential dangers lurking in dimly lit streets, making the warmth and security of the host's villa an appealing alternative. Firstly, the sheer duration of the feast meant they often stretched well into the deepest hours of the night, long past sunset. If a guest lived a considerable distance away, especially in a sprawling city like Rome, the journey home could be long and arduous. Travel in the dark, even within the city, was slower and less comfortable than during the day. Here's a quirky tidbit. Roman cities, despite their grandeur, were generally unlit at night, making travel after dark quite hazardous. Bands of robbers, drunken revelers, or simply the risk of tripping in the unlit streets and falling into open sewers were genuine concerns. Imagine a guest, perhaps a distinguished senator, contemplating a journey home after midnight through dark, potentially dangerous alleyways and the comfort of a soft couch in a well-guarded villa, suddenly becoming very attractive. Historians still argue whether the practical dangers of night travel were the primary reason for guests staying over, or if it was simply a convenient excuse to extend the conviviality and luxury of the feast. But safety certainly played a role. You might even picture a host subtly emphasizing the perils of the night, ensuring his guests felt no shame in accepting his offer of repose. Secondly, continued conviviality was a major draw. The post-dinner conversatio could be a vibrant affair, and often the most intimate and revealing conversations happened as the evening deepened. Guests might genuinely not want the pleasant social interaction to end. Staying overnight allowed the host and guests to continue their discussions, their games, or simply their relaxed enjoyment without the impending need to depart. This prolonged social bonding was a key element of Roman hospitality and networking. Finally, for some guests, especially those seeking patronage or political favor, lingering might have been a subtle strategy. It allowed for more informal interaction with the host and other influential guests, perhaps even facilitating private conversations in the morning. So while extreme comfort and indulgence were certainly contributing factors, the decision to stay overnight was often a practical and socially astute one, cementing the Roman dinner party as an extended immersive experience that blurred the lines between evening feast and morning departure. You've just seen the practical and social reasons that led guests to linger overnight after Roman feasts. Now let's consider what happened when those guests actually succumbed to slumber. Designated sleeping areas. Imagine the grand triclinium transforming into a semi-private dormitory, or perhaps specific quiet corners being utilized for post-dinner naps. A mainstream historical fact is that while Roman villas did have dedicated bedrooms, cubicula, it was common for guests to simply sleep on the very lecti dining couches they had been reclining on for hours. These couches, designed for comfort and extended lounging, were perfectly suitable for a deep slumber after a heavy meal and ample wine. You can almost feel the softness of the cushions, the familiar contours of the couch, making it an easy transition from convivial talk to peaceful rest. This informal sleeping arrangement was a practical solution to late-night departures. For larger households or more formal overnight stays, however, there might have been guest rooms specifically set aside for visitors, or cubicula hospitium. These would have been simpler bedrooms, often near the main living areas, but still offering privacy. The choice of where a guest slept might depend on their status, the intimacy of their relationship with the host, and the sheer number of overnight guests. Think of it as a fluid system adapting to the needs of the evening. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some very wealthy Roman hosts reportedly had slaves whose specific duty was to quietly monitor sleeping guests during the night, ensuring their comfort, discreetly adjusting blankets, or even fanning them if they became too warm. Imagine stirring in the dim light, half aware of a silent, attentive presence, ensuring your peaceful sleep. Historians still argue whether such detailed attention to sleeping guests was truly widespread, or if it was an exaggerated detail from literary sources meant to highlight the extreme luxury of the elite. But the very idea speaks to the Roman dedication to comprehensive hospitality, even extending into the unconscious hours. You might even picture a particularly fastidious host giving explicit instructions to his cubiculary chamber slaves to ensure every guest's comfort through the night. The transformation of the triclinium from a vibrant dining space to a quiet resting area would have been gradual. As guests drifted off, the sounds of conversation would slowly diminish, replaced by the soft crackle of dwindling oil lamps and the gentle sounds of sleep. The slaves, too, would work quietly, clearing away stray dishes and dimming the remaining lights, creating an atmosphere conducive to deep rest. This acceptance of impromptu sleeping arrangements on dining couches highlights the Roman emphasis on comfort and the integrated nature of their social life, where the boundaries between dining, socializing, and resting were far more permeable than in our modern world. It was a testament to a culture that truly embraced leisure, even to the point of turning the dinner party into a giant slumber party. You've just considered how designated sleeping areas often came into play after Roman feasts. Now let's pull back and look at the broader historical interpretation of all this indulgence, delving into the minute luxury and decadence debate. Imagine ancient moralists with furrowed brows lamenting the perceived excesses of Roman dining, contrasting it with a romanticized past. A mainstream historical fact is that throughout Roman history, especially during the later Republic and Empire, there was a constant moral and philosophical debate about the perceived decadence and luxury of their dining habits. Critics, often older senators or traditionalist writers, argued that the extravagant feasts and the pursuit of exotic foods were corrupting Roman virtues, leading to effeminacy, moral decay, and a departure from the austere values of their ancestors. You can almost hear the disapproving sighs of a Cato, the elder, lamenting the days of simple poles and condemning the lavish tables laden with imported delicacies. This debate was a recurring theme in Roman literature and public discourse. These critics often pointed to the vast sums of money spent on single banquets, the absurd number of courses, and the constant search for novel and shocking dishes as evidence of this moral decline. They believed that such excess led to gluttony, laziness, and a weakening of the Roman character, turning citizens away from civic duty and towards self-indulgence. It was a narrative of Golden Age simplicity being lost to a decadent present. It's a bit like watching a modern documentary about celebrity excess and hearing commentators shake their heads, isn't it? Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Roman satirists, while often exaggerating for comedic effect, used these debates as fodder for their work, describing utterly preposterous feasts and characters obsessed with food. Juvenal, for instance, a Roman poet, wrote scathingly about the social climbing and culinary excesses of his time, painting a picture of desperate guests enduring terrible food just to gain social favor. Imagine a Roman poet hunched over his wax tablet, crafting biting verses about a host who served nothing but watery gruel, yet still expected effusive praise. Historians still argue whether the actual level of Roman decadence was as widespread as depicted by these moralizing and satirical writers, or if these accounts represent extreme cases, primarily used as rhetorical tools to highlight perceived societal failings. But it certainly suggests that Roman society, despite its grandeur, had its fair share of critics and self-doubt. You might even picture a Roman guest discreetly rolling their eyes at a particularly pompous and over-the-top display of wealth. The very intensity of this debate, however, highlights the central role of dining in Roman life. If it was so integral that its perceived excess provoked such strong moral condemnation, it clearly held immense cultural and social significance. The tension between the ideal of virtue and the reality of indulgence was a constant undercurrent. Despite the criticisms and the sumptuary laws you heard about earlier, the desire for lavish entertainment and the profound social utility of the cena ultimately ensured that these extended, opulent dinner parties, so conducive to eventual sleep, remained a defining feature of Roman elite culture. It was a delicious paradox, wasn't it? You've just revisited the debate surrounding Roman decadence in dining. Now let's shift from ancient texts and moral arguments to tangible remains, exploring how we piece together the realities of Roman meals through archaeological evidence of dining. Imagine excavating a Roman villa, carefully sifting through the earth and uncovering the very remnants of ancient feasts. A mainstream historical fact is that archaeological discoveries provide invaluable insights into Roman dining habits, complementing and sometimes challenging the literary accounts. Unlike written texts, which can be biased or exaggerated, physical remains offer concrete evidence of what Romans ate, how they cooked, and where they dined. You can almost feel the dust of centuries on your fingertips as you imagine uncovering a beautifully preserved mosaic from a triclinium floor or a fragment of a cooking pot still bearing traces of ancient ingredients. Archaeologists uncover a variety of evidence related to dining. Kitchen remains. Like hearths, ovens, and specialized cooking tools tell us about their culinary techniques. Dining rooms. Triclinia, and later, stabadia, reveal the layout and the arrangement of couches. Perhaps most direct are the Meshunon food remains. Themselves carbonized seeds, animal bones, oyster shells, and even remnants of exotic spices providing a direct glimpse into their diet. Pottery fragments, especially those of fine tableware or serving dishes, also offer clues about status and trade. Here's a quirky tidbit: the analysis of sewer and latrine contents from Roman villas has provided surprisingly detailed information about their diet. By examining ancient waste, archaeologists can identify specific types of fish, vegetables, and even parasites, giving a more accurate picture of daily consumption than often found in literary sources, which might focus only on the elite. Imagine an archaeologist, perhaps with a slight wrinkle of the nose, carefully analyzing ancient Roman sewage to learn about their culinary preferences. Historians still argue whether the evidence from these humble remains truly contradicts the image of lavishness, or if it simply adds a layer of understanding to the everyday diet that underpinned the occasional feast. But it certainly provides a rather visceral connection to ancient meals, doesn't it? You might even picture an archaeologist joyfully identifying a rare spice seed in an ancient drain, having found direct proof of an exotic import. Beyond just what they ate, archaeological findings also illuminate the context of Roman dining. The presence of elaborate mosaics, wall paintings, and sculptures in dining rooms speaks to the aesthetic importance of the space. The size and number of dining rooms in a villa can indicate the host's social ambition and their capacity for entertaining. This tangible evidence provides a grounded reality to the sometimes exaggerated literary descriptions, allowing us to build a more complete picture of Roman feasting. It reinforces that these long indulgent meals, which often led to contented slumbers, were not just a fantasy, but a meticulously organized reality, supported by sophisticated infrastructure and extensive resources. You've explored every corner of the Roman dinner party, from the grand triclinium to the subtle social cues, the exotic foods, and the surprisingly common practice of guests lingering, even sleeping overnight. As the soft glow of our imaginative journey begins to fade, let's bring it all together, feeling the lingering echoes of Roman night in our modern world. The Roman feast, as you now understand, was far more than a meal. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of indulgence, intellectual discourse, political maneuvering, and profound hospitality. It blurred the lines between day and night, between formal social interaction and intimate relaxation. You've reclined on those comfortable couches, tasted the mulsum, listened to the philosophical debates, and felt the contentedness settle over you as the evening wore on. This wasn't just about dining, it was about living fully and sensuously in the moment, to the point where even sleep became a natural extension of the evening's pleasure. Their approach to the night as a time for extended leisure and social bonding offers a fascinating contrast to our own fast-paced lives. For them, the long hours were a luxury, a testament to wealth, and a commitment to genuine conviviality. For us, perhaps, it's a gentle whisper from the past reminding us to slow down, to savor, and to truly connect. Now, as the last echoes of those Roman banquets softly fade into the quiet of your room, allow your mind to drift. The world of emperors and epic feasts of reclining and long, luxurious nights is now a comfortable memory, a whispered story in the soft night. Feel the gentle hum of the fan, the stillness around you, and know that even across centuries, the simple joy of good company, good food, and deep rest remains a timeless desire. Just breathe. Let your thoughts settle like the last embers in a Roman hearth. The echoes of their grand nights, their laughter, their conversations, and their peaceful slumber gently weave into the present. Rest now, unburdened by time. No one know 'em. Good night.